75% of kids who are brought up in a Christian home, who are brought up in church, as soon as they leave the home, within a year or two after they leave the home, are walking away from the church. Many never return. There are a number of reasons for this, but one of the major reasons is they don't think Christianity is true. They're talked out of it. You know why they're talked out of it? Because they've never been talked into it. We've never told them why Christianity is true. Oh, we've told them that it's true, but we've never told them why it's true. We've never given them any evidence. We've simply said, believe. As if we're more spiritual for believing without reasons than with. Rick just mentioned a Bible verse. We're supposed to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Nothing ever gets to the heart without first going through the head. We're supposed to know what we believe and why we believe it. But you know, just having it in the mind ain't enough either. You got to have both. You got to have the mind and the heart. Peter said, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have. 75% are leaving. It's an epidemic. Josh McDowell wrote the book, The Last Christian Generation. Why? Because of this number. How can we sustain Christians if 3/4 of our children who are brought up in the faith walk away? We better do something. We better do something fast, right? That's why I'm here, hopefully, to help maybe instigate you to do something about this problem. You know, there are 5 major questions in life. 5. Here are the 5 questions everybody needs to answer. First question is origin. Where did I come from? Second question is identity. Who am I? Third question is meaning. Why am I here? Fourth question is morality. How should we live? And fifth question is destiny. Where am I going? Origin, identity, meaning, morality, and destiny. Those are the 5 questions everybody has to answer. Now, the answers are either in this book or they're not. The answers are either in the Bible or the Bible's irrelevant. It's one or the other. Why do you think 75% are leaving? Because A, they don't think it's true. If they thought it was true, they'd have the answers to these 5 questions. If they don't think it's true, they're making up their own meaning. They're making up their own morality. They're coming up with their own stories about origin. And they think they have their own destiny in their hands when in fact they don't. You heard the problem with the self-made man? He worships his creator. That's the problem. We're either going to worship the creator or we're going to worship ourselves. There's only 2 choices. So I want to give you some evidence to show you that the answers to these 5 questions are indeed in the Bible. If I only have one message to give to somebody, for me, this is the message. Because I see so few people out there talking about why it's true. I hear a lot of people talking about that it's true, but not why. So I'm going to talk about why. You guys ready? Yeah. Here's what we're going to do. In order to show that indeed the Bible is true, the first thing we have to deal with is truth. What is truth? And does truth exist? In our culture today, we don't think truth exists. Or we say it's true for you, but not for me, or all truth is relative. We've got to be able to deal with those objections if we're going to say this book is true, right? Second question, does God exist? We have to give evidence that God exists, because if there is no God, then this book can't be a word from God, can it? You can't have a word from God if there is no God. So we're going to give evidence from outside the Bible that shows you that this book is indeed from God, that God exists. Thirdly, this book can't be true if miracles are not possible. If they're not possible, as many in our modern universities now teach, David Hume apparently, for some, has disproved that miracles should be believed. A great skeptic who died in 1776. A lot of people think Hume's arguments are good. They're not. But a lot of people think miracles are not possible. If they are not possible, then you might as well throw this book away, right? And then finally, and only then, will we be able to look at the question, is the New Testament true? Now you say, wow, why just the New Testament? Because if the New Testament is true, the Old Testament's true. Why? Because if the New Testament is historically reliable, and it shows us that Jesus really was God as he claimed to be, then whatever God teaches is true, right? That's axiomatic. Whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught that the entire Old Testament is true. So if the New Testament's true, you get the Old Testament thrown in, all right? Then, and only then, we'll be able to go to the final question, which is, so what? So what? So what if it's true? In our culture, it's whatever, right? Whatever. You've got Christianity, I've got Buddhism. Whatever. Whatever works for you. Who cares if it's true? We got to answer that question finally, right? All right, let's move on. Does truth exist? First thing we got to do when we ask the question, does truth exist, is define truth. And you remember, Jesus was standing, or probably bound, before Pilate. When Pilate asked the question, what is truth? After Jesus said, I am the truth, Pilate said, what is truth? Notice Pilate didn't wait for Jesus to answer. He just then went on to utter a truth claim, and the truth claim was that Jesus was innocent. We might say truth is telling it like it is. That's exactly what Pilate did. Telling it like it was at the time. Jesus was innocent. Truth is what corresponds to its object. If I say that this is a guitar right here, that's true. That corresponds to its object. If I say it's a piano, that would be false. Or you might say truth is what corresponds to its referent. If referring to this gentleman right here, I say he's wearing a blue and white shirt, that's true. It refers to his blue and white shirt. Truth is what corresponds to its referent. You say, well, Frank, this is very obvious. Why are we going through this? Because in today's culture, in the whatever culture, the first duty we have is sometimes to state the obvious. Because there are people out there who actually claim there is no truth. We got to deal with that, right? Now, we have to get a hold of a concept that you already know, an idea you already know. It's called the law of non-contradiction. And you just may not have thought about it explicitly, but this law of non-contradiction, we have to ensure that we bring to the forefront of our mind because it will help us discover what is false. And there's a lot of things out there that are false that are told to us as if they're true. And we've got to be able to show that they are false. And this law of non-contradiction says opposite ideas cannot be both true at the same time and in the same sense. For example, the earth can't be both round and not round at the same time and in the same sense. It's either round or it's not round, but it's not both. We're not just going to make an assertion, we're going to give evidence when we get to does God exist. Okay, I'm just simply pointing out now that they both can't be right. This is true about Islam too. Islam can't be true and Christianity true at the same time and in the same sense. Why? Because Islam says Jesus never even died, much less rose from the dead. They said he was taken to heaven before he was crucified. Surah 4, 157. Christianity, of course, says that Jesus not only died, he rose from the dead. They both can't be right. They can't be. Law of non-contradiction. Now, the law of non-contradiction is self-evident. Even those who deny it use it. Suppose a friend of yours, you catch him in a contradiction and you say, hey, that's contradictory. And he says, well, you know what? I don't believe in the law of non-contradiction. What should you say? Oh, you do? He's going to say, no, I don't. You're going to say, you do. No, I don't. You do. No, I don't. You're using it right now to contradict what I say. You can't think a thought without the law of non-contradiction. It is self-evident. You're using it to say that you disagree with me. That's contradicting me, right? Now, there was a great Muslim philosopher who got something right. His name was Avicenna. And he had a great way of convincing those who denied the law of non-contradiction. Avicenna said this. He said, anyone who denies the law of non-contradiction should be beaten and burned until he admits that to be beaten is not the same as not to be beaten, and to be burned is not the same as not to be burned. Right? Being beaten is not the same as not being beaten, and being burned is not the same as not being burned. Right? Okay. Now, I'm here to tell you that all truth is absolute truth. There are no relative truths. Every truth is absolute. And something that is true for all persons at all times in all places. You say, wait, I can think of a relative truth already, Frank. What is it? Well, right now I feel warm while the people in Alaska feel cold. That's relative. No, it's not relative. It's absolutely true for all people at all times in all places that right now you feel warm. Remember, truth is what corresponds to its referent. When referring to you, it's true you feel warm right now, despite what the people in Alaska feel. It's absolutely true for all people in all times in all places that right now the people in Alaska feel cold. That's absolutely true. There are no relative truths. Truth is truth. Now, when you say things like this, however, you get a lot of objections in our culture today. Here are some objections we get to absolute truth. There is no truth. I heard that said on the radio once. Guy called in and said, there is no truth. What do you do with that? Someone called in one time and said, you can't know truth. You just can't know it. Or sometimes they'll say, all truth is relative, or my favorite, it's true for you but not for me. Christianity may be true for you, but Buddhism's true for me, right? No one has the truth. You Christians, you think you have the truth? Let me tell you something. Nobody has the truth. What do you say to that? And if they really get angry at you or annoyed, they'll say, well, you ought not judge. You Christians, you're so judgmental. Stop judging. Don't you judge me. Jesus said, don't judge. We got to deal with all these things, don't we? If we can't refute these particular objections, then we can't say the Bible's true. Now, it turns out that every single one of these objections you see on the screen right now are self-defeating. In other words, they violate the law of non-contradiction. Let me show you what I mean. In fact, if you don't get anything else from the time we spend together than this one little tactic that I'm about to show you in the next 5 minutes, it'll be worth your time. Because when I learned this, and unfortunately I didn't learn it until I got to graduate school. I didn't learn this in grade school where I should have learned it, like everyone else should have. But when I learned this in graduate school at seminary, I went, wow, this will save me a lot of time. This little tactic right here, because it will allow me to refute all these false things I hear in the culture. And the way we're going to refute these claims is to apply the claim to itself. Apply the claim to itself. For example, if someone were to come up here, suppose I were to come up here and say to you, look, I can't speak a word in English. What would you say? You just did, right? Everyone can see that's self-defeating. To say I can't speak a word in English is self-defeating. It's logically self-defeating. Now, something that's practically self-defeating would be for me to say, my parents had no kids that lived. Right? Have to be here to say that. Now, we call this in the book the Roadrunner tactic because it reminds us of Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner. What's Wile E. Coyote's only mission in life? Catch the Roadrunner. And Roadrunner's just a little bit too fast for Coyote, right? Just as it looks like Coyote's about to catch him, Roadrunner stops short of the cliff, and for that split second, as Coyote goes blowing by him, Coyote's hanging in midair with that question mark over his head until he realizes what? He's got no ground to stand on, and he plummets to the ground in a heap. That's exactly what you can do to people who utter self-defeating statements. You can show them their argument has no ground to stand on, and they plummet to the ground in a heap. The entire argument collapses on itself. So when someone says there is no truth, if you apply the claim to itself, what should you say? Is that true? You see? Now, with one simple tactic, you look like a super genius. Just the law of non-contradiction. Or if somebody says all truth is relative, what should you say? Apply the claim to itself. Yeah, is that a relative truth? No, that's supposed to be an absolute truth. Right? How about somebody says this? This is a big one in our culture today. It's true for you, but not for me. What do you say to that? This one's a little bit more subtle, but it's still self-defeating. Apply the claim to itself. What do you say? This section over here. What do you say? Well, you could say why, but the easiest way to refute it is to say, yes, is that true for everybody? Is it true for everybody that's true for you but not for me? Because if it's true for everybody that's true for you but not for me, then true for you but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Right? Actually, there's a more fun way to deal with it. If somebody says it's true for you but not for me, say, sure, go try that with your bank teller. Go to your bank teller one day and say, I'd like $100,000 out of my account. Bank teller looks at your account and says, I'm sorry, you only have $47.12 in your account. And you go, huh, that's true for you but not for me. Give me the 100 grand. Or you're going a little fast down the highway, a cop pulls you over, he says, you're going 90 in a 55. You simply look up at him and go, hey, that's true for you but not for me. And then you speed away. He can't give you a ticket, can he? Can he? I mean, if it's not true for you that you were speeding. Now, if it's true for you, it's true for everybody. When it's a truth that refers to its referent. And that's true for religious claims as well. If it's true that God exists, that's true for everybody, whether you believe it or not. If it's true that Jesus rose again for the sins of the world, that's true for everybody, whether you believe it or not. I go to a lot of churches, and I usually start out by saying, do you believe this book is true? And people always go, yeah! And then I ask, why? You know what answer, unfortunately, I get more than any other answer? Because I have faith. Because you have faith. Is that a good answer? Because you have faith, does that make this book true? You mean, the Muslims have faith the Quran is true. Is the Quran true then? No, your faith doesn't change a thing about this book. Either this book is true or not, regardless of what you believe about it. Does your faith change history? Will your faith change whether Jesus died and rose again? No, he either did or he didn't, right? Regardless of what you believe about it. Do you have to believe something to make it true? Do you have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground? Do all those people who don't believe in gravity float away? Look, there's another one. Come back! Come back! If you believe, you'll come back! No! Your faith doesn't change a thing about whether or not this book is true. The only thing your faith does is it appropriates the salvific content of it to you. It does not change whether or not God exists or whether or not Jesus rose again or whether or not this book is true. It only appropriates the salvific content of the truth to you. How about this one? There's no truth in religion, only science. You hear this a lot on college campuses. That's what they say. They say there is no truth in religion or philosophy or anything else. There's only truth in science. We get all our truth from science. So all your religious truths are just a matter of faith, and all the scientific truths over here, they're really true. What's the problem with the statement? Yeah, is that a scientific truth? No, that's not a scientific truth. You can't go in the laboratory and prove that. That's a philosophical claim right there. So it defeats itself. In fact, I don't have time to get into this, but it's all in the book. Chapters 5 and 6, where we talk about evolution and creation and intelligent design. Science cannot be done without philosophy. Science is built on philosophy. There are certain things that you have to assume in order to do science, and they're all philosophical. So this claim defeats itself and wipes away a lot of skepticism about Christianity. You ignorant, arrogant, judgmental Christians, you think you have the truth. Let me tell you, nobody has the truth. What do you say to that? Yeah, then how do you have the truth that that's true? If we can't know the truth, how do you have the truth that nobody has the truth? Because if you have the truth that nobody has the truth, then I guess somebody has the truth, namely you, which means that nobody has the truth isn't true. I know this can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough, but actually this is the most ridiculous thing anyone could say. Why? Because in order to say that nobody has the truth, what would you have to have? You'd have to have the truth. In fact, you'd have to be God, essentially. You'd have to have all knowledge to say that nobody else has any knowledge. So you'd have to know all the truth yourself and then know what everybody else does and doesn't know in order to say that nobody has the truth. So you might ask somebody who says nobody has the truth, how do you know? Have you quizzed everybody in the universe exhaustively? Maybe somebody does have the truth. In fact, in order for you to say that somebody is wrong, what do you have to know? You have to know what is right. You can't say somebody is not right unless you know what is right. So just ask the person, how do you know that that's true? By the way, why are we supposed to keep an open mind? We're supposed to keep an open mind so when we see truth, we close our minds around it, right? There's a difference between being open-minded and empty-minded. And people confuse the two. They try and say that you got to be open-minded, which means you never draw a conclusion. Well, should I draw a conclusion about that? Should I be open-minded about always being open-minded? That would be empty-minded, wouldn't it? You see, there are some questions that are closed. For example, Is there any doubt? Is there any doubt that we defeated the Germans in World War II? We know that, right? Should you be open-minded about that? Is there any doubt that George W. Bush is the 43rd President of the United States? No. Or that Lincoln was the 16th? Should you be open-minded about that? No, there are some questions that are closed. There are some questions that are closed. There's enough evidence you go, I don't need to look at that anymore, I got enough evidence. I think the same is true with Christianity. I think if you look at the evidence, you go, you know, there's enough evidence here, and people have been trying to punch holes in it for 2,000 years, and they just can't seem quite to do it. I think I'll become a Christian. At least one person says that's a good idea. You know, you're hearing a lot now from our postmodern culture that everything is meaningless, or that words don't have any meaning. What do you say to that? Everything's meaningless. You say, hey, what do you mean? I mean, if everything's meaningless, what do you mean by that? Well, let me tell you what I mean. Look, if everything's meaningless, then why don't you just shut up, okay? Trying to tell us how to live when you say there's no meaning. Of course there's meaning. How about this one? You should doubt everything. This is the skeptical claim, right? What do you say to that? Yeah, should I doubt that? See, why are skeptics skeptical of everything but skepticism? Why don't they start doubting doubt? See, if you start doubting doubt, then you're back to knowing something for sure, right? Maybe skeptics ought to start doubting their doubts. Have you guys ever thought about doubting your doubts? I doubt it. Actually, how many in here have doubts? Everybody has doubts. If you don't have doubts, you're not thinking. But when you... All right, so a lot of people aren't thinking, sorry. Everybody has doubts. But when you look at the evidence, at least for me, I realize that most of my doubts are emotional. They're not intellectual. And when they're emotional doubts, I should go, look, that's just emotion. Emotions come and go, but facts never change. When you look at the evidence for Christianity, you realize that you ought to start doubting your doubts. How about, oh, this is the biggie. This is the trump card. You can get through all this, and they're going to say, but you ought not judge. Yeah, there you go. What do you say to that? You say, isn't that a judgment? See, so the next time somebody tries to stop you dead in your tracks for judging, they say, don't you judge me. You know what you ought to say to them? Then why are you judging me for judging? That's what they're doing. You can't avoid making judgments. Did Jesus say don't judge? What did Jesus say? He said in Matthew 7:1 and following, the most popular Bible verse in the country today, even quoted by unbelievers, they seem to know this one. He said, judge not lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you'll be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be able to more clearly see the speck in your brother's eye. Obviously, we can't make any judgments then, right? Is that what Jesus is saying? That's not what he's saying at all. Notice, he's telling you to take the speck out of your brother's eye. He's simply saying get the sin out of your own life first before you go try and take the sin out of your brother's eye or the sin out of your brother's life. He's not telling you not to judge. That would be self-defeating. He's telling you how to judge. He's not telling you not to judge. He's telling you how to judge. Get your life in order. If you have that same sin or a bigger sin, get it out of your own life. Don't be judgmental, in other words. You have to make judgments, though. Everybody makes judgments. Everybody in here would have already died if you didn't make judgments. Think about every judgment you make every day, between right and wrong, between good and evil, between safe choices and dangerous choices. Everybody makes judgments. You'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. We have to make judgments. In fact, the Bible commands us to make judgments. This is one of the commands, Matthew 7:1. I don't have time to go through these verses, but I just want to mention these verses that you ought to go look up on your own at some point to show you how many times the Bible tells you to make judgments. Again, not in a judgmental way with a bad attitude, but in a way that is corrective and helpful to your brother. Here are some verses, including Matthew 7:1. Look down a little further. Matthew 7:15 says, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. How are you supposed to watch out for false prophets if you don't make a judgment? You've got to make judgments. 1 Corinthians 5:12, expel the immoral brother. Oh, we're supposed to expel immoral people from the church who claim that something that really is immoral isn't? Yes. 1 Corinthians 6:2, Titus 1:9, James 5:19, Matthew 18. What's Matthew 18? The famous passage about church discipline. How are you supposed to do church discipline if you don't make judgments? You have to make judgments. Matthew 23, the entire chapter of Matthew 23. What's Jesus doing in Matthew 23? Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, you brood of vipers, you whitewashed tombs. Sweet and gentle Jesus would do that? Look, we have a false idea of Jesus in our society. Jesus was not Barney. Okay? Jesus was more like a drill sergeant than Barney. Okay? Jesus told it like it was. 1 John 4:1. Don't believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see if they're from God. How are you supposed to do that without making judgments? You have to make judgments. You'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. It's self-defeating to say otherwise. In fact, how can you become a Christian if you don't make a judgment? How could you stay an atheist if you don't make a judgment? You're making a judgment, aren't you? No matter what worldview you have, you're making a judgment that you think it's true. All right, here's a summary. Truth about truth. Contrary beliefs are possible, but contrary truths are not possible. You can believe everything's true, but everything can't be true. And finally, objective truth can't be denied without being affirmed. Suppose somebody says to you, yeah, but there are no objective truths. You ought to say to them what? Use the Roadrunner tactic. Is that an objective truth? That there are no objective truths? Look, if it's not an objective truth, then why should I believe it? If it is an objective truth, it defeats itself. So I guess there are objective truths then. All right, that's truth. Does truth exist? Yes. Can you know it? Yes. It's self-defeating to say you can't. Let's move on now to the question of God. Is it true then that God exists? A God beyond the world who created the world and sustains the world. This is called a theistic God. That God created the universe and sustains the universe, but he's not the universe like the pantheistic God or the God of Shirley MacLaine. God is you, God is me, God is the grass, God is the trees. Not that God. The God that created and sustains. We're going to give evidence that this God exists, the theistic God. Here are the three arguments. I'll briefly list them and we'll go through them. First is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. It says if there was a beginning to the universe, there must have been a beginner. Second argument is called the teleological argument from the Greek word telos, which means design or purpose. And if it basically says this, that if there's design in the universe and say design in life, there must have been a designer. Third argument is more philosophical in nature. It's from morality, and it says if there is a real standard of rightness out there, a real standard of morality, an objective standard, it's not just my opinion and your opinion, but it's really, there are certain things that are really right and certain things that are really wrong, then there must be some source of that standard of morality. If there's a moral law prescription, there must be a moral law prescriber. So the first two are scientific, and we'll give scientific evidence for the first two. The third is the moral argument. And it's more philosophical in nature, and we'll cover that. Let's start with the beginning argument, the cosmological argument. And this is the argument that many say is the argument that points to the Big Bang. You say, well, Frank, we're Christians. We don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. The evidence for the Big Bang is pretty good. Some of the evidence I'm about to show you. In fact, I'm going to show it to you in an acronym, SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. And I'm just going to list them here. I don't have time to get into it, but the first argument that the universe had a beginning is from the second law of thermodynamics. That's the S. The U is the fact that the universe is expanding. The R is the radiation afterglow discovered by Penzias and Wilson, two scientists who were actually working out of Homedale, New Jersey, Bell Labs in Homedale, New Jersey, in 1965. Found the radiation afterglow for the initial Big Bang explosion. The G stands for the great galaxy seeds discovered by the Kobe space satellite in 1992. And E stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity. Those 5 lines of scientific evidence are having most scientists admitting, you know what? The universe exploded into being out of nothing. Now, I don't have time to get into why this proves that. It's all in the book, chapter 3, so get the book. Makes a great Christmas present, by the way. Christmas is coming, you know. But I just want to point out that most scientists are coming to the conclusion, yes, the universe exploded into being out of nothing. What is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said, nothing is what rocks dream about. That's where the universe came from. Nothing. What rocks dream about. Then this entire space-time continuum leapt into existence. Some say, well, why couldn't natural law have created the universe or been responsible for the universe? Because there was no natural law. Natural law itself came into existence at the Big Bang. There was nothing. And then the universe exploded into being. What do I mean by nothing? No time, no space, no matter. Nothing. And then bang, it all leapt into existence. So if it's not something inside of nature, because nature itself was created at the Big Bang, it must be something outside of nature. So if it's not a natural cause that caused it, it must be a supernatural cause. And that cause must be immaterial. Why? Because it created material. Must be timeless. Why? Because it created time. Must be powerful. Why? Because it created out of nothing. Must be immaterial and spaceless, because it created space. You're starting to get the idea that this is the God we're talking about from the Bible, right? In fact, Einstein's theory of general relativity has been proven accurate to 5 decimal points. That's the E in surge. In fact, Einstein for a long while didn't want to believe the universe had a beginning. He actually put a fudge factor in his equations when he first figured out general relativity, because he didn't like where it was heading. It was heading toward a creator. He didn't like that. He wanted the universe to be eternal. So he put a fudge factor into his equations to keep the universe from expanding. But then Edwin Hubble was out at Mount Wilson in California. He said, yo, Al, why don't you come out to my telescope here in Mount Wilson, and you can look through the telescope and see the redshift in the light to see that all those galaxies out there are moving away from us, which implies that if we could watch the universe in reverse, we would see everything collapse back to a point of nothing. Al went out there, he looked through the telescope, and he went, uh-oh, I made a big mistake. He said, the greatest professional mistake in my life was putting the cosmological constant into my equation. You know what the cosmological constant was, by the way? To do his cosmological constant, the great Einstein had to divide by 0. Ooh, second graders are going, ow! You don't divide by 0. That's right. But the great Einstein did. He repented of the cosmological constant, and Einstein went on to say, I don't care about the details. What I'm looking for now is the mind of God. He wanted to find out the mind of God. Now, to our knowledge, Einstein never became a Christian. His theory seemed to show that the universe exploded into being out of nothing, which would point to a theistic God, but for some reason, Einstein believed in a pantheistic God, a God that is everything rather than created everything. But his evidence pointed to the fact that the universe had a beginning and exploded into being out of nothing. Now, what would Einstein do if he were here today and you were to say to him that the universe did not have a beginning? Well, he'd probably do this. All right, that's the cosmological argument. Once again, a lot more in the book on that, chapter 3. Let's move on to the teleological argument. Not only did the universe explode into being out of nothing, it did so with great precision. The fingerprints of the Creator are on the universe. What do I mean by that? Well, if you take a look at our solar system, for example, where are we? There we are right there, third rock from the sun, right? Third rock from the sun, there's Earth. Well, if we were just a little bit closer to, a little bit further away from the sun, we wouldn't be here. If the axial tilt wasn't 23 degrees of this planet, we wouldn't be here. If the Earth's rotation was not 24 hours, we wouldn't be here. The universe is precisely tweaked to support life on Earth. This is called the anthropic principle in science. That the universe is so precise, just as it is, that if any one little thing were altered, man, anthropos, wouldn't exist. If the gravitational force were altered by 1 part in 10 to the 40, we wouldn't be here. If the expansion rate of the universe slowed down by 1/1,000th, 1/1,000,000th more slowly than it is now, we wouldn't be here. If Jupiter wasn't in its current orbit, we wouldn't be here. See Jupiter? There it is, right there. Why? Because Jupiter acts as a cosmic vacuum cleaner. Its gravitational force is so great that it attracts all the cosmic space junk, all the meteors, to it rather than us. In fact, if Jupiter didn't have one of its 63 moons, we might not be here. Take a close-up look at Jupiter. See Jupiter here? You see those purple marks on Jupiter? What are those purple marks? Those purple marks are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because without Jupiter, we wouldn't be here. In fact, you want to see how big Jupiter is? Check this out. There's Jupiter, right? Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. There we are, Earth, Mars, Venus, Mercury. Look at poor Pluto. You know, Pluto's been demoted recently. Did you hear that? Pluto is no longer a planet, according to scientists. I think it's size discrimination. I mean, here's poor Pluto. What does he take? 252 years to go around the sun, something like that? And we just say, forget about it. Forget about it. You're not a planet. Don't bother. Where do we get off saying that? They think that's cool. Take a look at this. You can't even see Pluto. Now, this amazing solar system is amazing, but let me ask you a question. How big would our solar system be if we could take our galaxy and shrink it down to the size of the continental United States? Our solar system would be the size of a quarter on the floor in the Nevada desert. A quarter! And how many galaxies are out there? According to scientists, billions. How much distance is between stars just in our galaxy? This is another anthropic constant. The amount of distance, the amount of miles between our star, the sun, and another star an average distance away is 30 trillion miles. You say, hey, that's a long way, Frank. How long is that? Let me put it in perspective. The space shuttle, when it's in orbit, goes around the Earth between 17 and 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles a second. You got trouble getting to work in the morning? Take the space shuttle. You'll be there. I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we can get in the space shuttle at our star, the sun, and go to another star an average distance away, 30 trillion miles. How long would it take us? It would take us 201,450 years, going 5 miles a second. Which means if you had gotten in the space shuttle at the time of Christ, at our star, the sun, and started traveling to another star an average distance away, going 5 miles a second, you'd be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. The heavens are awesome. And the heavens are a clue to us as to who God is. In fact, February 1st, 2003, Saturday morning, President of the United States went into the Oval Office. They turned on the TV camera. Every major network carried his address. Saturday morning? Looked into the TV camera. He said, My fellow Americans, our nation this morning has experienced a great tragedy. The space shuttle Columbia, upon re-entry into the atmosphere, burned up in the skies over Texas. There are no survivors. The president then went on to quote from Isaiah chapter 40. Why did he quote from Isaiah chapter 40? Because here's what Isaiah chapter 40 says. This is God speaking. To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls them each by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. The president then went on to say, the same God that created all those stars and named all those stars knows the names of the 7 astronauts who perished today. We can all now pray that they are safely home. You want to know who God is? Remove all limits from your mind. That's God. You want to know who God is? Look to the heavens. What's in the heavens? You know how many stars are in the heavens according to scientists? The number of stars out there are about equivalent to the number of sand grains on all the beaches on all the earth. And to go from one sand grain to another sand grain, going 5 miles a second will take you over 200,000 years. The heavens are awesome. Only God is more awesome. Most of us Christians have the wrong idea who God is. We think God is like our cosmic bellboy. You know, we like go, God, you who, I need help down here. Well, he's there for that, but he doesn't always do things the way we want him to do, does he? The same God that's holding all those stars together and running the entire universe might have something up his sleeve, so to speak, that isn't in your plans, right? He may do things that we don't quite understand because he's infinite and we're finite. Always keep that in mind. Why are you to make no graven image? Commandment 2. Because any image you make of God necessarily limits his majesty. You can't make anything that represents God because he's completely out of this world. The closest thing we know about it that was in this world is Jesus Christ himself. We saw him in his human form. We saw Jesus in his human nature, but he had a divine nature as well. Not only is the universe amazing, but so are you. You know what this is? This is a one-celled amoeba. This is the amoeba that the Darwinists say we all evolved from. You heard of the theory of macroevolution? From the goo to you via the zoo? This is the goo. Or from the infantile to the reptile to the crocodile to the gentile? This is the infantile. Now, in Darwin's day, that amoeba was thought to be a very simple, simplistic little blob of protoplasm. Wasn't anything too complicated. Maybe it could have come together by natural forces. Today, we know otherwise. How do we know otherwise? Well, in order for me to explain it to you, let me take you to your breakfast table. How many people in here like alphabet cereal? You like alphabet cereal? Let's suppose you're a kid. You want to have a bowl of alphabet cereal? You come downstairs one morning to have a bowl of alphabet cereal. You get to the kitchen. You see the alphabet cereal's knocked over and on the placemat, the letter spelled, take out the garbage. Mom. What are you going to assume? The cat knocked the box over? Earthquake shook the house? No, you're going to say that's intelligent design from an intelligent being. Mom. Right? Or let's suppose you're laying out on the beach one day and you look up in the clouds and you see drink Coke. What do you assume? Unusual cloud formation? Wind coming from the north? Oh, it's cloud evolution. No, you immediately go, I don't see a skywriter up there, but there had to be one. Why? Because that's intelligent design from an intelligent being. Natural laws don't make messages like that. Well, Natural laws don't make messages like that, and I hate to tell our evolutionist friends this, but they don't make messages like DNA equal either. DNA is a 4-letter genetic alphabet that every living thing has. You have DNA, I have DNA, a banana has DNA. And DNA can communicate information much like the English alphabet can communicate information. It only has 4 letters. The English alphabet has 26, but it can communicate information. And it communicates an incredible amount of information. It communicates information just like take out the garbage mom. But it's a lot more complicated than that. The question is, how much information in DNA is in a one-celled amoeba? What I'm about to tell you is not from a Christian. What I'm about to tell you is from Richard Dawkins, one of the most vociferous, ardent evolutionists out there, the man who wrote The God Delusion. Well, in his previous book, The Blind Watchmaker, Richard Dawkins admits that the amount of information in a simple amoeba, so-called simple, is about equivalent to 1,000 complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica. 1,000 complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't have enough faith to believe that that resulted by natural law. I mean, to believe that that resulted by natural law is like believing that the Library of Congress resulted from an explosion in a printing shop. I don't have enough faith to believe that. It takes more faith to be an atheist than to be a Christian. The first life requires an intelligent cause, and all subsequent life requires an intelligent cause too. I don't have enough time to get into how incredible you are. You know how many cells you have in your little toe, for example? Give you a visual. Just look at your little toe, ladies. Your little itty-bitty toe. You know how many cells are in there? The number of cells in your little toe are about equivalent to a house, say a 3,000 square foot house, filled from floor to ceiling with little baby peas. Each pea representing a cell. You know how much information is in each cell? 25,200-page books in every cell. I don't have enough faith that that resulted by natural law. All right, there's a lot more in the book on that as well, but we need to move on to the moral argument. If there is no God, then you can't say that this was really wrong. You can't say 9/11 was really wrong. You can only say you didn't like it. You can only say it made you sad. But you can't say that it was really objectively morally wrong. Why not? Because if there is no God, that's just your opinion against bin Laden's. If there's no objective standard beyond humanity, then that's just your opinion against his. Let me ask you a question. How do you know who's right and who's wrong? Mother Teresa versus Hitler. Mother Teresa's right. Thank you, brave sister. Somebody's here willing to take a stand. I'll say Mother Teresa's right. Anyone want to go with me on that? All right, you guys are brave today. But how do you know she's right and he's wrong? You say, well, Mother Teresa loved people and Hitler killed them. Yeah, but how do you know it's right to love and wrong to kill? The Bible says. Do you need the Bible to know right from wrong? No. If you needed the Bible to know right from wrong, then God was unjust for condemning the entire generation of Noah. They didn't have a Bible. They had the law written on their hearts like we do. In fact, that's how our country began. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It's written on your heart. You know right from wrong intuitively. I'll get to that in a minute. Let me ask you the question this way. How do you know which map of Scotland is better? How do you know? What's the only way you could know? What would you have to see? Scotland. You'd have to see a real unchanging place called Scotland. And when you do, you can see that map A, while it's not perfect, is a better representation of the real Scotland than is map B. If Scotland doesn't exist, those two maps are meaningless, right? Well, that process of comparison is the same thing you do when you compare Mother Teresa and Hitler. Mother Teresa wasn't the standard. Certainly Hitler wasn't the standard. There's a standard beyond both of them called the unchanging moral law. It's God's unchanging nature. And we measure both of those individuals by that standard, by his nature. We say Mother Teresa, while she wasn't perfect, lived up to the standard better than did Hitler. That standard is God's very nature. Everybody knows the basics about right and wrong. How do you know it? Well, it's written on your heart, but in a practical way, you know right from wrong best by your reactions, not your actions. For example, I may not think stealing is wrong if I steal from you, but what do I say the second you steal from me? Hey, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. See, I know it by my reaction, not my action. If somebody says to you, there's no such thing as right and wrong, how can you disabuse him of that notion? Kick him in the shins. How about that? Is that wrong? I must pause here and point out that this tactic is not a Christian tactic, nor is it in any way endorsed by Morning Star Ministries. Okay? But it gets the point across, right? They'll know by reaction. And everybody knows right and wrong on the basics. In fact, everybody knows right and wrong generally. You say, oh no, we disagree on things. No, we don't. We only say we do. You know, in our culture today, we actually have people that think, or that say they think, that this is a constitutional right. This is called partial birth abortion, where you deliver a baby nearly completely out of the womb, drill a hole in the back of her skull, and suck her brains out with a vacuum. There are many people in Congress right now who think that this is a constitutional right. There are some on the Supreme Court that think so as well. Really? How can that be? How could we show them and demonstrate to them that this is not really a right? If we could show them and put them in a position where they would react, they would realize what the right thing is. In other words, if we could put them back into the womb, they would become pro-life immediately, wouldn't they? It was Ronald Reagan who said, I've noticed all those in favor of abortion are already born. Exactly. Now, I don't want to get too far afield here, but I do want to point out one thing. Whenever you bring up the issue of morality, particularly in the public square, you always get this objection. What about the separation of church and state? What about that? You want to impose your religious viewpoint on us, and you're not supposed to do that. First of all, let me point out the separation of church and state isn't what you think it is, but I don't have time to get into that. I want to point out that this is not a separation of church and state issue. This issue is not about religion. The issue is about morality. See, there's a difference between the two. Religion has to do with our duty to God. Morality has to do with our duty to one another. Nobody on the pro-life side is saying, you need to worship, or here's how you have to worship, or here's when you worship. That would be legislating religion. Nobody's trying to do that. But we are trying to say, here's how you ought to treat one another. We can avoid legislating religion, but we can't avoid legislating morality. In fact, all laws legislate morality. How many times have you heard you can't legislate morality? That's the only thing you can legislate. Morality says this is right and this is wrong. The opposite is wrong. Well, that's what morality is. Every law legislates morality. The only question is, whose morality? The pro-life side wants to impose continued pregnancy on the mother. That's what the pro-life side is trying to do. It's true. You know what the pro-abortion side wants to do? They want to impose death on the baby. Both are impositions. The only question is, what should be imposed? When you have rights conflicting, like life and liberty, liberty must give way to life. Why? Because the right to life is the right to all other rights. If you don't have life, you don't have anything. That's why Jefferson in the Declaration states, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life. then liberty, then the pursuit of happiness. My pursuit of happiness doesn't supersede your right to life. If it did, I could shoot you if it made me happy. Right? So we all intuitively understand right and wrong. We suppress it, though, as Paul says in Romans 1. We deny it because we want to do our own thing. But we, deep in our hearts, know what's right. Now, if you want more on this, we have a book on the table called Legislating Morality. I don't have time to get into it, but we cover all these issues, and we cover the issues of abortion, homosexuality, and euthanasia without quoting Bible verses. Christians need to be involved in the public square. If we don't stand up for the weak and for the unborn, who will? Nobody. All right, let's move on now. We've got these three arguments. We can draw some conclusions from these three arguments. We know from these three arguments that the first cause, whatever it is, from the cosmological argument, we learn that this first cause is self-existing, immaterial, and eternal outside the universe. Why? Because he created material, he created time, he must be self-existing because nobody else created him. He's the self-existing one. We know he's infinitely powerful because he created out of nothing. From the teleological argument, we know he's infinitely intelligent. We know he has purpose. And from the moral argument, we know he's absolutely morally perfect and he's personal. You don't have a moral obligation to a force. You only have moral obligations to persons, and this personal cause, whatever it was, or whatever it is, must be, as I say, personal. This is the God of biblical Christianity that we've arrived at without referencing the Bible. Notice, from these three arguments, from the cosmological, teleological, moral, we can figure out that the being, the first cause out there, has the same attributes that the Bible says God has. Now, the only question now is, well, how do we know this isn't the Muslim God? Like, that's a theistic God, too. What can God do to help us understand that this revelation is true, the Bible, and not, say, the Quran? He could do something only he could do. Miracles. Miracles. Now, a lot of people have trouble with miracles. A lot of people think like Noah. You kidding me? How could that have occurred? I think Noah was literal. That's why I went with Bob Cornuke to Iran last summer to try and see if we could find the remains of Noah's Ark. And I'll give you the short summary of that. We have found petrified wood at 13,000 feet, and the nearest trees at 8,000 feet. The only thing we don't know for sure is if it truly is Noah's Ark, because it didn't say USS Noah on the side. A lot of people have trouble with resurrection. Come on, everyone I know who's died is still dead, and other people have trouble for some reason with Jonah. Is that a tale of a whale or a whale of a tale? How can you believe in Jonah? Come on! Right? What's the deal with Jonah? Well, what's the greatest miracle in the Bible? Is it Noah? Is it a resurrection? Is it Jonah? What is it? I hear a lot of preachers talk about how the resurrection is the greatest miracle in the Bible. It's a biggie, but it's nothing compared to the greatest miracle. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is believable. If it is true that God created the heavens and the earth out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants inside the heavens and the earth? Of course. A God who can create the universe out of nothing can do whatever he wants inside it. Can he keep somebody alive 3 days and 3 nights in a great fish? Of course he can. I mean, that's easy. I mean, we keep people alive underwater for months. It's called a submarine. God can't do it in a great fish. You know, there's a town skeptic who came up to a little girl standing outside the Salvation Army collection plate at the Salvation Army. She had her Bible out, and the skeptic came up to her and said, "You don't believe that Bible, do you?" And he said, well, the skeptic said to her, "You don't believe that Bible, do you?" And she said, "Well, yeah, I do." And he said, "Oh, come on, how can you believe it? It's filled with mist, filled with errors." She goes, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, like Jonah. That couldn't have happened. The gastronomical juices would have ate him up." She didn't know anything about apologetics, which is giving evidence for what you believe. She just, in her simple faith, well, the Bible says it, she said, "So I believe it." He said, "Come on, how could it have happened?" And she said, "Well, I don't know how it happened, but I'll tell you what, once I get to heaven, I'll ask Jonah how it happened." And then he said, "Well, what if Jonah isn't in heaven?" And she said, "Well, then you ask him." Some of you will get that tomorrow. Okay? So if the greatest miracle of all, the first verse, has already occurred, every other miracle is believable. And the interesting thing here now is we have scientific evidence that the first verse of the Bible is indeed true. Chapter 3 of the book, we lay it all out, where we show all these scientists are saying, you know, it really looks like Genesis here. Why don't scientists believe in miracles? Because they have a philosophical bias against it. More in the book on that. We got to move on to point 4. Is the New Testament true? Is it true? We know that truth exists, God exists, that miracles are possible because the greatest miracle has already occurred. In fact, if somebody says, I don't believe in miracles, you know what you ought to say to them? Look around, you're living in one. It's called the universe. But now, is the New Testament true? There are two questions we have to ask ourselves when we're investigating reliability in the New Testament. First question, do we have an accurate copy of the original New Testament documents? Or have the original, is there no way we can recreate the originals because we don't have the originals? Second question, do the original New Testament documents tell the truth? Suppose we have an accurate copy. That doesn't mean that what was originally written down was true. We could have an accurate copy of a lie, right? So we have to answer both questions. I don't have time to do number 1. It's all in the book, chapter 9. I'm going to jump ahead to chapter 2 and even abbreviate that. But let me just give you the answer to 1. Yes, we do have an accurate copy, despite what Bart Ehrman says in his book, Misquoting Jesus. Okay? We do. Second, do the original New Testament documents tell the truth? I'm going to give you 5 E's that will help you remember that, yes, we do have an accurate copy, or that we do, I should say, we do know the New Testament writers told the truth. These 5 E's are 5 of the 10 reasons in the chapter entitled The Top 10 Reasons We Know the New Testament Writers Told the Truth in the book here. The first E is we have expected testimony. I'll explain what that means in a minute. We have early testimony. We have eyewitness testimony. We have embarrassing testimony. And we have excruciating testimony. Expected, early, eyewitness, embarrassing, and excruciating testimony. Expected, very briefly, I'm going to skip over these. I'm just going to give you the highlight. Expected talks about the fact that we have some Old Testament prophecy which seems to indicate that a Messiah would come in the first century. So we ought to be expecting to see maybe some eyewitness testimony about that if the Old Testament is indeed true. And we've seen it's true on the fact that it gets the creation story right. So maybe we ought to expect to see a Messiah in the first century. Early testimony in the book there, we show how most, if not all, the New Testament documents are written prior to 70 A.D., which is within the lifetimes of the eyewitnesses. So we have early documents. Eyewitness testimony, we point out in the book that there are over 100 eyewitness details just in Acts and the Gospel of John alone, which have been proved to be true either by archaeology or other historical means to have actually occurred. We know beyond any reasonable doubt that the New Testament writers were telling the truth, that they were eyewitnesses. And I'm just going to read just 2 verses from Luke just to point this out, and then we'll move on because we've got to finish up here. But these 2 verses of Luke from chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, I want to read these 2 verses, and as I'm reading these 2 verses, ask yourself, does it sound like Luke is making up a story? Are you ready? In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod, tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the desert. Does it sound like he's making up a story? No, all those 8 people are known to have existed. From other historical writings or archaeology, we know those people existed. And we know the time that he's talking about, 29 A.D. This is not a once-upon-a-time story. If it was a once-upon-a-time story, that's what Luke would have said. Once upon a time. But he's putting historical crosshairs on the text. And there are several details in Luke's writings and John's writings in particular, which we know are eyewitness details. Okay? And if Luke and John are right, so are Mark and Matthew, because they tell the same basic story. All right, I got to jump ahead to embarrassing testimony. As I say, we got limited time here, so I'm just going to jump ahead to this, and I'm going to point out that this is a principle historians use when they're trying to figure out whether a historical writing is telling the truth. It goes like this. If there's something embarrassing to the author or authors, it's probably true. Why? Because you're not going to make that up. You're not going to make up things that make yourself look bad, right? You're only going to have, if you're making up a story, you're going to have things in there that make you look good. Turns out the New Testament, and by the way, so is the Old Testament, but let's look at the New Testament now. The New Testament's filled with embarrassing details about the authors. For example, the New Testament writers depict themselves as dim-witted. You notice that? They're dim-witted. They fail to understand what Jesus is talking about on several occasions, despite being taught several times, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to go, I'm going to die, I'm going to rise from the dead. What? Well, we don't know what he's talking about. They are uncaring. They fall asleep on Jesus not once but twice in his greatest hour of need. They make no effort to give Jesus a proper burial. Who buries Jesus? Joseph of Arimathea. Who was Joseph? Well, he was a member of the Sanhedrin. What did the Sanhedrin do? The Sanhedrin actually sentenced Jesus to die. So wait a minute. The New Testament writers are saying that they kind of ran away, and then Joseph, a member of the Sanhedrin, came and buried Jesus and put him in a Jewish tomb. Now, why would they make that up? They look bad. He looks good. Jesus is put in a Jewish tomb. That's the last place they'd put him if they were making up this story, right? Because the Jews would have gone to their tomb and said, no, here's his body, right? If he was in their tomb. Or if he wasn't buried in their tomb, they would have said, he wasn't buried in the tomb. But you know what they wound up saying? Oh, the disciples came and stole the body while the guards were asleep. Well, that's a pretty stupid excuse, isn't it? Number one, if a Roman guard fell asleep on watch, what would happen to him? Off with your head. Secondly, if you're asleep, how do you know what happened? You ever think about that? I was asleep and stayed asleep while they come and stole away the body. Okay. They are rebuked. Peter's called Satan by Jesus. You think they made that up? You think Mark was making up the story and he said, yo, Pete, I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you say? Paul rebukes Peter for being wrong about a theological issue. Peter is trying to teach that the New Testament believers have to obey the Old Testament law. You know what Paul says? He comes in Galatians and says, I told Peter to his face that he was wrong for trying to get these new believers to obey the Old Testament law. Now, Peter is supposed to be the first pope. I know papal infallibility didn't come till much later, but why would Paul tell Peter that he's wrong? And why would they put that in the scriptures if they're making up a story? If you're making up a story, if you're making up a new religion, you don't have these problems. Everything's fine, right? Turns out if you look at the New Testament epistles, the letters, most of them are about problems. 1 Corinthians, what's the problem? Sexual immorality. Paul writes a letter. 2 Corinthians, they don't think Paul's an apostle. What does Paul do? He writes in a letter. Galatians, legalism. What does Paul do? Writes a letter. Colossians, what's the problem? All sorts of heresies. Paul writes a letter. Suffering throughout the ancient world. What does Peter do? He writes 1 Peter. Now, if they're making up a new religion, making up a story, they don't have these problems, do they? But the problems are throughout the New Testament church. Why? Because that's really what was going on. Right? The other interesting point about this is you notice that all the problems they were experiencing back then are the same problems we're experiencing today. We still got sexual immorality. We still got all sorts of heresies running around out there. We still have people suffering. That's why this book is still relevant. We're still dealing with the same problems. If they were making this up, they wouldn't have those problems. Also, they are cowards. Peter denies Christ 3 times after saying he wouldn't, and then the disciples run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! And who are the brave ones? Ladies, the women. That's right. I am woman, hear me roar. I didn't run away like you sissy pants men did. Now, who wrote this down? Men. Now, what man? Is going to write down that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Nobody. But all the men say that, don't they? Now, if I was making this up, if I was a man making this up, here's how I'd write it down. I'd say, we marched right down there and moved that sissy Roman guard out of the way. Then we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. Right? They are doubters. Despite being taught several times that Jesus would rise from the dead, they're doubters after they hear about him rising. Not only are they doubters after they hear about him rising, they're even doubtful after they see him. See this verse, Matthew 28:17. That's 2 verses before the Great Commission, the end of the book of Matthew, when Jesus says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations," right? That's 2 verses before it. And yet they're saying that some were doubting. They're standing there looking at the risen Jesus, and they're going, "Oh man, I don't think that's Jesus. You think that's Jesus?" "Yeah, I'm telling you, man, that's Jesus." "It can't be Jesus. He was dead. I saw him crucified. He was in the tomb. He couldn't be Jesus." "I'm telling you, man, it's Jesus." "It can't be Jesus." "How do you know it's Jesus?" The women told me." Okay. Not only are there embarrassing details about themselves, there are embarrassing details about Jesus that they never would have made up if they were making up a new religion and had Jesus as being God. Because Jesus is considered out of his mind by his own family who come to take him home. He's deserted by many of his followers. He's not believed in by his own brothers. He's thought to be a deceiver. He turns off Jewish believers to the point that they want to stone him. Remember when he says, "Before Abraham was born, I am"? And they pick up stones to stone him. Why? Because he was claiming to be the I am of the Old Testament. Do you remember when God appeared to Charlton Heston? And Charlton said, "Who can I say who's asking me to do this?" And he said, "I am." I am meaning what? The self-existent, eternal one. The one with no beginning and no end. Jesus was saying, "That's me. In my divine nature, that's me." And they went, they picked up stones to stone him. He's called a madman. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And he's crucified despite the fact that being hung on a tree was to be under God's curse, according to the Jews. If you were making up a story or a new religion about a Messiah for the Jews, you'd never have the guy hung on a tree. Why? Because he's under God's curse. Jesus was under God's curse in a way. In fact, there's only one place Mel Gibson shows up in the Passion. Where does he show up? His hands are nailing Jesus to the cross. Why? He said, "Because I helped put him up there." That's right. Jesus was under God's curse, the curse of sin that we have put upon ourselves, and he took it away because he loves us, and he loved us even though we were sinners. Finally, we have not only expected early eyewitness and embarrassing testimony, we have excruciating testimony. This is Peter being crucified upside down. Question: what did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? They thought that they had a unique relationship with the eternal God as Jews. Why would they make up a new religion? Why? In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. Because by saying the resurrection did happen, what did that get them from an earthly perspective? They got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks I want on my benefit plan. If you're making up a new religion that gets you beaten, tortured, and killed, that's just stupid. Nobody would do that unless they thought it was true. And these folks knew it was true. Why would they die for a known lie? You say, "Wait, Frank, we got people out there dying all the time." And you already told us that Islam can't be true if Christianity is true, but these people die for Islam. They're martyrs. You're not suggesting that martyrdom proves Christianity is true, because if it does, then it also proves Islam, and they both can't be true. What's the difference? The difference is that the Muslim martyrs don't have evidence that they're going to get the 72 virgins when they die. They don't have evidence that Islam is true. In fact, Muhammad was asked to do miracles, and in the Quran he says, I do no miracle. I'm only a warner that there is only one God. He was just a warner. He was not somebody that did miracles. Miracles are attributed to him later, 100 years after he was gone. They attributed miracles to him in the Hadith, the written traditions of what Muhammad said and did. He couldn't do miracles. There's no proof he was a prophet. But the New Testament writers were eyewitnesses. They saw Jesus, touched Jesus, ate with Jesus. They knew with their own senses that he had risen from the dead. Many people will die for a lie they think is the truth, but nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know it wasn't a lie. So we have expected, early, eyewitness, embarrassing, and excruciating testimony. This book is true. And if the New Testament's true, the Old Testament's true as well. Are there any errors in the Bible? No, that would make God a liar. Okay, does truth exist? This is review. Yes. Does God exist? Are miracles possible? Yeah, the greatest one's already occurred. Is the New Testament true? Yes, we have expected, early, eyewitness, embarrassing, excruciating testimony. So what? So what? It's true. So what? Well, let's go back to the 75% problem. What can we do about the 75% problem? Hopefully we're equipped now and can get some more information on this. We can go out there and prevent our own kids from making the wrong choices. We need to do it because we're going to be the last Christian generation, and you want to spend 18 years bringing your kid up in what you think is the truth, only to have him walk away at some liberal university and just chuck it all because he doesn't think it's true anymore. But also, we're starting a new ministry called crossexamine.org. Rick and company are here helping us out with this. We're going to college campuses and presenting material like this because we need to do it, because if we don't, we're going to lose an entire generation. Our first date is at Appalachian State, November 5th. Al Wood is helping us get on UNC Chapel Hill. We'll probably be going there early in the spring, and we've got several other places we're looking at as well, including colleges out in Colorado and all across the country. In fact, we're starting this new ministry. We have some material at the table. We can show you about it. I also want to point out that at the table, we have a lot of resources there, and I want to point out that CD thing on the right, the Norman Geisler CD, is an incredible resource if you want to know more about apologetics. There are 12 books on that CD that you get for $50, including the Baker Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics. Everything you ever wanted to know about virtually anything in apologetics is on that CD, searchable format, on your computer. An amazing resource. And there's a full 6.5-hour DVD of this seminar. I'm doing it much quicker than we normally do it. Can you imagine that? Called The 12 Points That Show Christianity is True. That's great for Sunday schools. It's great for churches. It's great for homeschoolers. It'll walk you through why Christianity is true in 12 points. I do it in 4. I'm abbreviating a lot. In 12, as the book does, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. It'll show you in airtight order why Christianity is true. The book is also available on CD and MP3 back there as well. Last thing, we started with these questions. The 5 great questions in life: origin, identity, meaning, morality, and destiny. Let's answer them and go eat lunch. Origin, where did you come from? God. The Bible is indeed true. You were created a special creation of God. Identity, who am I, you ask? You are a special creation of God made in His image. What does His image mean? Not physical image per se, but you're made in His moral image. You have an intellect, you have emotion, and you have a free will, just like God does. You're a moral creature and you make choices. Hopefully choices for God, not against Him. Because you're made in His image, you have infinite worth. Meaning, why am I here? You're here for two reasons. The purpose of your life is to know God and make Him known. That's why you're here. Now, every one of us does that in a different way. There are different gifts in this room. There are different gifts that you can help people know God and make Him known. And when I say know God, I don't just mean intellectually, I mean in a worship sense as well. You can believe that God exists but still go to hell. Even the demons believe that God exists. Even the demons believe that Jesus rose from the dead, but they don't put their trust in Him. So our mission is to know God and make Him known. That's why we're here. That's our meaning. Morality, how should we live? According to God's Word. Destiny, where are we heading? There's only two choices. There's only two choices. Either you are an adopted son or daughter of God, and you will be with Him for all eternity, or you have chosen to be separate from Him. Last thing I'll mention now is on an airplane not long ago, when there was an atheist next to me, and he said, I can't believe in a God who would send anybody to hell. I said, who said God does this? Could it be that you send yourself there? And he went, I never thought of that. It's like, yeah, you have a choice. God's not going to force you into heaven against your will. That would be hell to you. People can't spend an hour in church, are going to spend eternity in heaven? That would be hell to them. You get to decide where you go. Your eternal destiny is your choice. Does God make a choice? Yes, He does. That's predestination, free will. We have a book called Chosen But Free if you want to read more about that, but you have a choice as well. You have a choice. What choice are you going to make? Better make the right choice or I'm going to stick the evangelical linebacker on you. Thanks.